можливості документообігу у нас вже чують. Певні бажаючі отримали ссылку у віді роздруківки і намагаються зайти у вебінар, вводячи цю послідовність символів з клавіатури, що, мабуть, неможливо зробити коректно. Тому декілька хвилин ще почекаємо, будь ласка, поки усі бажаючі зможуть зайти в зал та бути присутніми у нашому вебінарі. Тому я вибачаюсь, декілька хвилинок ще прошу почекати.
Семен, я думаю, что начинаем.
Начинаем, да? Хорошо, поїхали. Доброго дня, шановні присутні. Наш сьогодні захід присвячений такій формі психологічного насильства, як відчуження одного з батьків, або parental alienation syndrome, або, як зараз у останній час кажуть, parental alienation. Нині, попри значне поширення цього явища в Україні, на відміну від інших країн, в Україні фактично відсутня не лише система раннього виявлення, запобігання, реагування на це явище, а навіть взагалі відсутні будь-які правові механізми вирішення цього кризового питання та захисту і дітей, і одного з батьків, який стає жертвою відчуження. Тобто ці люди стають незахищеними і потерпають від відчуження. Фактично, людина залишається сам на сам зі своєю проблемою. Реально, держава на сьогоднішній день не захищає ані дитину, ані одного з батьків. Це трапляється і у випадку, коли людина звертається до суду, і у випадку, коли людина звертається, один з батьків звертається до органу опіки та піклування. Через таку усталену практику, яка не дає очікуваного результату взагалі, а іноді звернення одного з батьків до державних органів ще й погіршує ситуацію, переважна більшість батьків у такій ситуації взагалі нічого не робить і через відсутність будь-яких перспектив навіть не намагаються захищати ані себе, ані дитину. Також нема і належного суспільного усвідомлення і наявності цієї проблеми, і наслідків цієї проблеми для дитини як у дитинстві, так і у подальшому житті. Це травма, яка залишається з дитиною в той чи іншій мірі протягом всього життя. У більшості випадків і обивателі, і фахівці у лапках прикриваються оцінками того, що це сімейні справи, в них втручатися не треба, це з'ясування стосунків незакінчених стосунків між батьками після розлучення та таке інше. І такий підхід сприяє тому, що і суспільство, і владні органи залишаються осторонь, і, повторюсь, людина стається сам на сам з цією проблемою. Водночас міжнародний досвід та навіть висновки ВООЗ кажуть, свідчать про те, що це комплексна, дуже складна проблема, розв'язання якої потребує, опять-таки, вибачаюсь, комплексного фахового підходу як з боку суддів, адвокатів, правоохоронців, психологів, педагогів та усіх, з ким стикається і дитина, і батьків в такій ситуації. Саме з метою розпочати обговорення та почати напрацьовувати певні підходи, законодавче регулювання, формування судової практики, розробку фахового підходу у діагностуванні, ранньому виявленні та, як наслідок, запобіганню відчуження одного з батьків, ми проводимо сьогоднішній захід. Зараз я хочу перед тим, як передати слово нашому поважному спікеру, пану Філіпу Маркусу, я хочу представити перекладача. Це Марія Козирєва, яка буде забезпечувати синхронний переклад з української на англійську, з англійської на українську мову. Також я хочу представити пані Марину Лелеку, яка також буде присутня на нашому заході і розповість про свій особистий опит відчуження у дитинстві, розповість, як це впливало на подальше її життя. Я вважаю, що такий приклад буде дуже важним і дуже корисним для усвідомлення реальної проблеми, її рис та необхідності розв'язання цього питання, в тому числі на законодавчому рівні. Також я хочу сказати, що ви можете залишати свої запитання або в чат, або в рубриці, вкладці «Вопроси і відповіді». Також нагадую, що разом з посиланням на вебінар ви отримали ссылку, за якою ви можете скачати інструкцію, як підключити синхронний переклад, тому що спікер буде розмовляти англійською мовою, але у вкладці «Русський канал» ви будете чути український синхронний переклад. Також там же ви можете ознайомитись з перекладом презентації українською мовою. Наш таймінг приблизно такий. Я наразі закінчую. Передаю слово пану Філіпу Маркусу, судді у відставці Єрусалимського суду з сімейних питань, адвокату, фахівцю з питань ПА, Parental Alienation. Десь біля 40 хвилин буде йти його доповідь. Потім ми надамо слово пані Марині Лелекі, і потім всі бажаючі зможуть поставити запитання нашому поважному спікеру. Сподіваюсь, що він зможе відповісти на них. Я усім бажаю плідної праці, дякую і починаємо працювати.
Thank you very much, Simon, for introducing me. Let me introduce myself. My name is Philip Markus. Until about 9 years ago, I was a judge in the Jerusalem Family Court. I will explain to you a little more about the family court in Israel, because that is the basis for some of the things that I'm going to be speaking about today. I was born in England. I got my law degree from University College London. I was a lawyer in London until August 1978, when I moved to Israel with my family. I requalified as a lawyer in Israel, and in 1995 I was appointed a judge. I served for 17 years. I was the senior judge of the family court in Jerusalem for 5 of those years. And since my retirement, I have been researching and writing and lecturing in many countries and investigating how things could be made better for children in the legal system. This does not only mean parental alienation, it means a whole variety of issues, including how the voice of the child should be heard in court proceedings. And I'm being consulted more and more by different countries as to how to reform the family law and the family court system so as to take account better of the needs of the children who are involved in these proceedings. That is how I was contacted by Simon Jen through the Parental Alienation Study Group, which is an international organization. As its name says, it combines experts, lawyers, judges, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and parents who have been affected by what we call parental alienation, in order to develop a better understanding of how it happens, why it happens, and how to remedy it. I have chosen in the last 3 years or so to concentrate more on prevention and how it should be dealt with by the courts, because I think we know enough about the causes of it, and there are treatment methods, some of which are accepted in many places, some of which are not. But the prevention, I think, is what we ought to be working on at the moment. But in order to prevent a phenomenon, we have to know what it is. So the first part of my talk today will be about parental alienation, what it is, and also what it is not, because it is important to know that not always when a child stops being in contact with a parent, is that because the other parent has affected him. There are other reasons, and we will deal with that issue. After having dealt with the definition, I will deal with prevention programs, and then I will deal with how courts, in my view, ought to deal with these issues if they get to court. Clearly, if we are able to prevent it from happening, then the cases will not get to court. And that is a far better situation for the children and for their parents. But let's now start working through my presentation. So the first question is, what is parental alienation? The definition is action by one parent which causes a child without justification to reject contact with the other parent who was previously loved. I want to look at that in a little more detail. First of all, our understanding is that a child, by definition, loves both parents. A child is brought up by the parents in the normal situation, and therefore anything which causes the child to stop loving one of his parents must be unusual. It has to be emphasized that there are some circumstances in which it is proper and healthy for a child not to have contact with one of his parents. If the one parent murders the other parent, if one parent is brutally cruel to the child or to another family member, if the parent is hopelessly addicted to drugs or is hopelessly mentally ill and there is no hope of rehabilitation, in those cases, a child may be justified in not wanting to see that parent. But those cases are extremely rare. And in every other case where a child refuses to have contact with another parent without justification, then we have to look at the causes of that. I will deal with some of those issues shortly, but what we have to emphasize at this point is that usually one parent causes the other child to stop having contact. There are a variety of different ways in which that happens, and it may happen without the parent really understanding what is going on. So as you will see, this may be deliberate. It may be that the parent who is alienating the child has a personality disorder. He may be a narcissist. He may be antisocial. He may be borderline. These are the names of personality disorders which cause disruption of normal personal relationships. It may be that the parent is mentally ill. It may be that he feels unjustifiably, but because of his illness, that the other parent is going to damage him or the child. It may be that a otherwise normal person simply cannot cope with the separation and wants to get revenge on the other parent who has exploded the dream of romantic love with which he entered into the relationship. But it may well be that it is a failure to set boundaries. We know that children, especially adolescents, sometimes develop feelings which are against one parent or another. And if a child expresses that opinion, then it's the responsibility of the other parent to persuade the child that he should continue to have good relationships with both parents and the extended families. And if the parent simply says, the child is independent, the child knows what he wants, the child is old enough to decide, that is just as responsible as if he had told the child not to have contact. So we are dealing here with parental responsibilities, and I would say that it is the responsibility of every parent to make sure that even if the parents are separated or divorced, it is the responsibility of each parent to make sure that the child has good relationships with both parents and the extended families of both parents, because the child's mental health and psychological development depends on that happening. And I'm going to emphasize again that we have to distinguish parental alienation from justified rejection. There are also situations in which a parent will reject a child. A parent will say, I don't want anything more to do with you. That parent also needs treatment, and the child also needs help, because that is going to damage the child. We will hear from Marina what parental alienation did to her, but I'm going to go into some of the details as we move ahead. So the word parental alienation is somewhat ambivalent or ambiguous. It is not perfectly clear who is doing the alienation, whether it's the child or the parent, but we want to define it as child psychological abuse. Abuse simply means that you are damaging the child. And while legislatures and courts and judges and people understand that a child should not be physically abused, should not be physically beaten, and that a child should not be sexually abused. The difficulty with psychological abuse is that there are no physical signs, and the child who has been brainwashed by a parent to hate the other parent may be functioning well in all other areas. This child may be doing well at school, getting good grades, may be a pleasant person, may be properly socialized with friends, but this is abuse which is not visible. And unfortunately, there are psychologists and psychiatrists who also do not recognize the kind of abuse which is going on and how damaging child parental alienation is. How is it done? So the alienating parent might say that the child was abused by the other parent when he was an infant. He may accuse the other parent of violent or abusive behavior, either to other children or to that parent. These lies are taken on by the child. The child, by definition, loves both parents. But if he can be convinced that there has been some terrible act or terrible neglect, then the child will try to resolve the problem by choosing sides. It happens in the course of a divorce dispute that each parent wants to get the child on their side, as we said, also in order to revenge on the other parent. And the child who is forced into that position is in an impossible quandary. He feels loyalty to both parents. He cannot resolve that loyalty tension. And as a result, he will choose a side. He will choose a side because that is more comfortable for him. He does not have to bother himself with these divided loyalties. But there are many other ways in which a parent may induce a child to stop having contact with one of the parents, the other parent. Sometimes the mother will say, if you go to father, I will miss you so much. I will be very sad without you. That causes the child to feel guilty and to want to protect his poor mummy. Or the father will say to the child, I know you are going to mummy, but I am afraid that your mummy may hit you as she used to hit you when you were small, or that she will feed you bad foods, and that I know that you don't want to go, but the judge says you must go. All of these things being said make the child feel that he is in danger, and the parent may contact the child on the phone every half hour to check if he's feeling okay, to check if everything is okay. This brings the child to feel that he is in danger if he spends time with the other parent. And the allegations may extend to grandparents and the extended family. You know that your grandfather was in prison because he was an evil person. There is another technique which is just as likely to cause a child to reduce or to stop contact with the other parent, and that is to move house without consultation with the other parent and without an order of the court. In these cases, the child loses the proximity, loses the physical, geographical closeness and that will cause the child to have less and less contact. And although the parent who is moving with the child will say that he's doing it for the welfare of the child, or that he or she will get a better job, or that he or she has remarried and wants to move away, that is another way in which the child is abused psychologically by reducing the level of contact with the other parent. What happens to the child? Why is this a form of child psychological abuse by the parent? The research and the people I have met, and Marina will probably tell us about this, there are all kinds of terrible effects of parental alienation. The child in this situation, firstly, is not experiencing normal couple relationships, normal husband and wife relationships, because the parents are splitting up and divorcing and arguing. That's true of children of divorce generally. But the child who has been alienated is not experiencing normative child-parent relationships, because by definition, he has no relationship with one of the parents. And the relationship with the alienating parent, the parent with whom the child lives, that relationship is liable to be pathological, in the sense that the child is not being treated by the parent with whom he or she lives as a child, but is being treated as an ally, as a partner in the war against the other parent. There are situations in which the parent consults with the child about everything and turns the child into an adult. That is damaging for the child. And there is a list here of some of the results: a lack of identity, poor reality testing. The child believes that the other parent is evil or bad without any evidence other than what he's been told. The child cannot analyze interpersonal relationships properly because he's been affected by what happens. He may hate himself. Inside, he knows that he should love both parents, but because he has been forced to denigrate or demonize one of the parents, inside, he will not like himself. He will feel that he is not a worthy person because, unlike his friends, he only has one parent whom he sees or is in contact with. Or he may feel that he can do anything. He can reject a parent. He can damage a parent. And that's something he can do. The child may grow up with gender identity problems. If he grows up, a boy grows up the whole time with a mother and has no male role model, that might give rise to gender identity issues. The child may think he is big enough to make all decisions. We know that by law, children are not allowed to drive a car if they're under the age of 17 or 18. We know that in some countries, they're not allowed to buy a drink until they're 18. We know that if you take your 6-year-old child and you ask the child if he wants to have an injection, wants to have an inoculation, and he says, "What's an inoculation?" And you tell him, well, the nurse is going to take a sharp needle and hurt you and stick it in your arm, the child will say, "I don't want." If you listen to that child will not get the inoculation. And he may get sick. And he may die. He's not old enough to make that decision. And if your 13-year-old daughter wants to go out and you say, you have to be home by 10 o'clock. And she says, no, I have a right to move about as I see fit. That child is endangered. So to tell the child that he or she can decide whether they're going to go and see mommy or daddy, that is giving the child maturity, that is giving the child powers to decide things which the parents have to decide for him or her. These children are often aggressive. They may act out in school. They may hit other children. They may, because of this internal tension, turn to drugs. They may turn to inappropriate sexual behavior. They may not only reject the parent, but they may reject the teacher. And they may reject any adult who tells them what to do because they think they can do it themselves. Either that, they may become passive and emotionally unable to react, or dependent entirely on the alienating parent, and they may have no guilt or feeling if they've done something bad, because they know that they are already not a good child, and that leads to all kinds of pathology in the future. And this damage lasts into adulthood. Low self-esteem. A child who grows up in normal circumstances knows that he has part of his personality and part of his genes from his father, and part of his personality and his genes from his mother. But if he is told that his mother is all bad, then the child will grow up thinking that half of him is bad. Or if he's brought up by the mother to believe that the father is a violent person, the child may grow up thinking that he has a strain of violence in him. And that causes him to not to behave properly when he grows up. He may hate himself for having rejected a parent when he realizes that he was manipulated by the other parent. He may blame himself. If he rejects one parent and he has brothers or sisters living with that parent, he may feel guilty for having rejected them. The research shows there is a much increased incidence of depression among children who were alienated when they grow up. They have great difficulty making couple relationships because, as I say, they did not see a normal couple relationship. They are more liable to cope with these things by using drugs, and they may be alienated from their own children for the same reason as we already stated, that they did not absorb when they were growing up normal child-parent relationships. And 2/3 of them, a much higher proportion than in general, are divorced because they simply cannot hold down relationships, because they do not trust their own feelings, because they have been convinced as children that they should not have contact, and they realize that that is damaging to them, but they do not trust their own relationships. So what do we do about it? I think everyone will agree at this point that when a parent unjustifiably prevents a child from having contact with the other parent, that is a bad thing, and it's going to cause a problem. When I was 9 years old, I saw a headline in the newspaper. I lived in Birmingham. Those of you who understand football will know there is a team called Birmingham City. When I was 9 years old, there was a footballer called Jeff Hall. Jeff Hall played for Birmingham City and he played soccer for England. And when I was 9 years old, he died of polio. When he died of polio, a couple of years earlier, they developed a vaccine. And people demanded that they and their children should have this vaccine against polio. Now, polio no longer exists, except in 2 or 3 countries where they reject the vaccine. And I want to look at how we deal with parental alienation on the model of a vaccine. How do we prevent it? First of all, as the chairman said, the phenomenon is not widely recognized in the public and not recognized by professionals. And therefore, there needs to be primary prevention by a campaign of bringing to the attention of the public that there is such a thing. And this can be done in all kinds of different ways. But the essential message is that if parents split up, that's something that happens. But that itself has an effect on the child. But if the child is induced to stop having contact with one of the parents, that is far more serious, far more damaging, and it needs to be prevented wherever possible. So that has to be the theme of a campaign. In Israel, we've had the press involved with it. We've had programs on television. Social media are very important. And the content of what is conveyed obviously has to be very carefully monitored. And that needs to be done by professionals who understand the message and how to get it through. One of the methods that we are trying to put forward here is that in high schools, youngsters who are taught about emotional relationships, they should be taught that about parental responsibilities, that when they do have children, they are responsible for ensuring that the child has good contacts with both parents. And it can be done in youth movements. We need to be encouraging couples before they get married or before they set up a relationship to understand their responsibilities to their children when they have them. And if we get that message through, then that is we have achieved a great deal. But this prevention campaign needs to be addressed also to professionals who are dealing with children in their life. We will come on to that shortly. It's part of another section of my talk. What happens when someone gets sick? You have a sore throat. So you go to the pharmacy and you get a tablet. If it gets better, that's fine. If not, then you go to your family doctor, and your family doctor will identify the cause of the sore throat, and he will prescribe you the appropriate medicine and tell you how to conduct yourself. So secondary prevention contains 2 parts. It's identification and treatment at the earliest possible stage. Identification can be done in schools, it can be done in the doctor's office, it can be done by social workers, provided that these people are educated and know that there is such a thing as psychological child abuse by alienation, and they know what resources are available to prevent it from developing and getting worse. So we have to identify at-risk populations. Which children are particularly at risk of being affected by parental alienation? the research shows that children between the ages of 8 and 13 are more at risk, that children with special needs are more at risk. This is for all kinds of psychological reasons, and there is no time to go into this now. I should say at this point that I am offering courses for professionals. I'm offering consultations for governments about how to deal with these things. This is really an introductory talk so as to alert people to the fact that this phenomenon exists. We need to also identify parental behavior which is problematic. So, for example, if the school teacher is looking after the children in the playground before they go home, and daddy and mommy are outside the school gates screaming at each other and shouting at each other, and the mother is accusing the father, or the father is accusing the mother of doing bad things, the child hears this. The teacher should be alert to the fact that this might indicate that one of the parents is trying to divert the child away from the other parent, and that needs to be dealt with immediately. And if a doctor in his office sees that on Thursday morning, every 2 weeks, the mother comes along and brings the child and says the child's sick, and realizes that when it's happened 2 or 3 times, that is just before the weekend, that the child is supposed to be with the father, the doctor can identify potentially alienating behaviors and can suggest that the parents and the child get help. Teachers and doctors and social workers and psychologists need to identify things that a child does which may indicate that things are not well between the parents, and enable the parents to get support services and the child to be put into therapy before things deteriorate to the final stage of there being no contact between the child and one of the parents. So these are the kinds of professionals who work with children: teachers and school counselors, medical doctors, pediatricians, social workers, psychologists, therapists, and also lawyers. I understand that many people in the audience today are lawyers, and there are some judges. When a client comes to the lawyer to consult about divorce, about separation, the lawyer should be asking questions about the children, should be asking how the children are affected by the dispute, should be asking whether the child has good relationships with both parents and their extended families. And if this is not the case, then it is, in my view, his duty to refer the client to get professional help so that the child will be affected as little as possible by the breakup of the family. And even relatives can identify that. The grandparents, the uncles, the aunts, friends, they may be able to see signs that the alienated parent is not aware of, that the child is being slowly driven away from one parent, and that parent simply doesn't recognize it as happening. It is rare for parental alienation to happen overnight. There is usually a process, that the visits become less frequent, that the telephone conversations become smaller, shorter, that the child may not want to go or may not want to leave. These are all signs that the parent himself may not be aware of or may not know the reason for. So what do they have to do, the professionals? You've said it. Identify children at risk, identify parents at risk, identify the behaviors which indicate that there may be some problem with contact between the child and one of the parents, and identify children's reactions. And then, when they've identified these things, refer the parents and the child to have advice and professional intervention. This is the point at which the professional can also alert one of the parents to the fact that something is wrong. Because if the professional understands there's a problem, invites both parents, and one of the parents denies that there is a problem, or blames the other parent, at that point the professional should know. And it can be a lawyer, and it can be a school counselor, and it can be a teacher or a doctor, should say, look, there is a serious problem here, and if you cannot agree to go for therapy, you cannot agree to go for counseling, then you need to go to court and get the court to sort it out. All that is providing that the court knows what it's doing. And this is the issue that I am working on, and I received material about the law in Ukraine. The law in the Ukraine is fine. It provides for joint parental responsibilities. It provides that the child should have contact with both parents. The law says that the divorce and separation of the parents does not affect their responsibilities to the child. As I understand it, the difficulty in Ukraine and in many other countries is that the courts do not know how to handle these cases, and as a result, they may cause even more damage. One thing has to be clear, that every day that goes by when a child is not in contact with a parent, the possibility of restoring contact becomes more and more difficult. A psychologist friend of mine told me that if a child has not seen a parent for 3 months, it is practically impossible to restore that contact without a highly expensive expert counseling and assistance. You will understand that if one of the parents has been influencing the child and telling the child that the other parent is bad, evil, abusive, violent, addicted, there is nobody to tell the child that that isn't true. The child is not being given an opportunity to see the other parent and speak to him. And so the child is in an echo chamber and will not hear anything to the contrary. So that when a case comes to court, it has to be dealt with immediately. And there are a number of techniques that can be used. Here I'm going to speak briefly about the Israeli Family Court, which was set up in 1995. I was one of the first judges to be appointed to that court. And there are a number of principles which make it clear that family law is different from other areas of law. These are not normal civil cases. And what is needed are judges who specialize in the topic of family law, and they need to be educated about child development, about child-parent relationships, about disorders and problems which parents may have, psychological disorders. And they also need to know how to handle cases where there is conflict between parents. So one of the principles on which the Israeli Family Court was founded is the idea that you have to have specialist judges. In order to be appointed to hear family cases in Israel, you have to have knowledge and experience as a lawyer of family law and family cases. There is also in-service training. There is a compulsory seminar every year for family judges where they learn about the specific issues of family law. Another principle is one family, one judge, which means that one judge will deal with all the disputes relating to a specific family, and the case will be dealt with by him. It will not be moved by one judge to another because of time constraints. Another principle we have is that there is a social services unit which is attached to the court, is part of the court. These are experienced social workers who have access to a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and their job is to advise the parties, the parents, about what might happen to the children if the proceedings go on too long. They advise them that it's possible to get help with mediation or alternative dispute resolution. And they also advise the court about how serious the cases are. In the same way as when there is an accident or a building collapses or even on a battlefield, the medical people do what's called triage. They divide the people involved into three sections: those who are already dead or liable to die immediately, those who can get help themselves, and all the attention has to be focused on those whose cases can be helped but have to be helped urgently. And therefore, it is important to assess, as soon as an application is made to the court, how serious the allegations are and how urgent the case is. So what we are recommending is that in any case, when any kind of abuse is alleged, and here we're not only talking about child psychological abuse by a parent, we're also talking about sexual abuse or physical abuse, the application needs to be prioritized. A preliminary hearing has to be set immediately. As soon as the case reaches the court secretariat, it has to be handed to a judge who has to fix a hearing. Our Supreme Court president issued a practice direction just a month ago saying that the first hearing must take place within 14 days. In those 14 days, the party against whom there is an allegation must file a response in writing, and all the parties and their lawyers must attend all hearings, because in that way the court can take control of the proceedings, the judge can decide how the proceedings and can watch what the people are doing. Preliminary hearing within 14 days, assessment of danger to the child. He can assess whether it's possible that the parents will be helped by conflict resolution, by mediation, arbitration. He can refer to a social worker. If he sees fit, he can appoint a lawyer for the child or a guardian ad litem, and he can make an order requiring the parents to cooperate with the social worker and with the child's lawyer, and state at that point, a parent who does not comply will be sanctioned. We'll see what those sanctions are, what those penalties are shortly, and fix another hearing within 10 days so as to see whether the parties are complying with the orders that are given. Judges will say, we don't have time for this. We are very busy. We have a long list. I can tell you from experience that if these cases are managed properly at the beginning, the vast majority of them will not require an evidentiary hearing later on. The vast majority of these cases will be dealt with at the early stages and will finish by then. The second hearing. At this stage, we've only had 20 or 25 days since the application was filed, and the judge will have enough information to say whether there is any problem with the child having contact with one of the parents. He will know what the allegations are, and there will have been a preliminary investigation of the allegations by the social worker and by the child's lawyer, and will be able to make an order that the child should have contact under supervision if necessary with the parent, so that the separation between the child and the parent is cut short. The court may order the child to start assessment by an expert, experts who understand from maltreatment and understand from parental alienation, and order that the parents should start a course of co-parenting re-education, so they will know how to handle cases, how to handle the relationships between them and improve the relationships so that the child will not continue to be alienated. And the court will make orders for reports within a short time. And if the reports are not filed, the court will call on the parties and the experts to give reasons why they have not reported. In that way, the court will fix another hearing, a third hearing. What do the orders of the court have to contain? They must be clear, detailed. It must say that the child will see the mother on such and such a date, at such and such an hour, that the responsibility of the father to bring the child to such and such a place, and if the child is not brought within 10 or 15 minutes, then there will be an immediate court hearing. The court will want to know why not. Time limits for performance, goals, timely assessment, interim reports, and warning of sanctions. What are these sanctions? It is highly important that the court should make sure that the orders are being complied with, because if they are not complied with, the impression is that the judge is powerless, the court does not know what to do, the court can make a lot of decisions, but nobody needs to obey them, and the child gets the impression that the courts are useless. What are the sanctions? Fines, legal fees to the other party, costs into court, change in child support, even imprisonment. I remember one case in which a woman was stopping the father from seeing the child, and we tried all kinds of things. We tried supervised visitation, and she always found an excuse. And we tried persuading her that the child needed it, and it didn't work. In the event, I told her, your son is going to be with the father on Sunday. And if he is not with the father on Sunday, then you have to come to my courtroom at 8:30 on Sunday morning with your toothbrush, because I'm going to send you to prison for 3 days. And in that time, the child will, in any case, be with the child's father. Which would you prefer? And this was effective, and she stopped her prevention of contact. And at the end of the day, there may be a necessity to refer to child protection authorities, and the child may have to be taken temporarily or permanently into a foster family.
Выступление дать слово Марине, у нее работа начинается через 15 минут.
Добрый день, слышно меня?
Сейчас.
No problem. No.
Спасибо.
Спасибо. Я не могу сказать, что я пережила в детстве. Слышно меня, да?
Yes, that's okay. I was not aware of that. Okay, I was about to finish, but Marina, please tell us what you have to tell us.
Спасибо большое. Я не могу сказать, что я пережила отчуждение родителя в детстве, потому что я думаю, что это длится в какой-то степени до сих пор. Даже после длительной реабилитации и более 100 часов терапии с психологом, я думаю, что это все-таки еще продолжается. Потому что до сих пор я не всегда могу понять, что какие идеи были мои, а какие были навязанные со стороны мне семьей родителя, с которым я жила. И хотела бы сказать открыть еще одну сторону этого отчуждения. Это то, что, к сожалению, отношения с тем родителем, с которым я проживала, с мамой, у меня не сложились, скорее всего, именно благодаря тому, что она настраивала меня против отца. И у меня появилось ощущение, что она настраивала меня против меня. И поэтому, когда я пыталась получить свое мнение на тему своего отца, это считалось с ее стороны предательством. А с моей стороны предательством ощущалось как невозможность иметь своего мнения на тему достаточно близкого мне человека. Таким образом, наши отношения с ней не складывались более 15 лет. И мне потребовалось длительный период для того, чтобы эти отношения возродить только после того, как я сложила свое мнение уже об отце, я с ним познакомилась и какое-то время общалась. Могу сказать, что это действительно ощущается как психологическое насилие, как тогда, так и сейчас. Хотя, скорее всего, маминой вины в этом, в большей степени нет. Она такой человек, и по-другому она, наверное, не могла. Но, тем не менее, последствия этого процесса я ощущаю до сих пор. Спасибо большое.
Спасибо вам, Марина. Я думаю, это было очень важное включение, потому что то, что говорит Филипп, это своего рода больше теория, основана, конечно, на практике, а вы – это живой пример того, как сказывается отчуждение в будущем, во взрослом возрасте. Спасибо вам большое, желаю вам удачи. Благодарю.
Спасибо вам большое, да. Счастливо. Спасибо.
Спасибо большое. Извините, что нам пришлось прервать выступление Филиппа, но у Марины очень жесткий тайминг, у нее начинается работа.
This was an important way to make it plastic, to make it clear what happens. And if we're talking about public campaigns to make people understand how damaging this kind of abuse is, the evidence, the testimony of adults who as children were alienated plays a very important part. So thank you, Marina. I hope you have a wonderful life from now on. Let me now finish. I have, I think, 2 more slides as to what I'm recommending we should do about parental alienation. Students of professions who are going to be dealing with children and family matters need to have at their stage when they're undergoing courses, and we're talking about law students, education students, medical students, social work students, psychology students, there need to be courses for professionals, in-service training for judges and lawyers and teachers and doctors and social workers and psychologists, so that they will understand how damaging this is and what can be done about it. It may be that there will be a need for consultation on family law to amend the law so as to explain what the responsibilities of children, what the responsibilities of parents to their children are, and how the children need to be brought up with good relations with both parents. From what I've seen of the law in Ukraine, the law is pretty good. However, the law about enforcing court decisions needs to be tightened up to make very clear that these decisions have to be given priority and have to be enforced immediately. What may be necessary in Ukraine is family court reform. And we've already mentioned specialist judges, we've mentioned social services support in the court, we've mentioned swift procedures. There is one more issue that is hearing the voice of the child. According to Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of a child's voice should be heard in any proceeding where his welfare or his future are going to be dealt with. However, that does not mean that the child chooses. As one of my colleagues said, the child has a voice, but not a choice. And we've explained that children are not sufficiently mature to make decisions for themselves. These children, having been, as we said, brainwashed, are very convincing. And therefore, the judge or the person who hears the voice of the child has to be aware that the child has been convinced to say what he's going to say, and that he may be saying things which are simply not correct. The child believes them to be correct because the child has been convinced. But one of the indicators that the child has been influenced, and this is one of several, is that the child is not ambivalent. We find that a child who has been physically abused or even sexually abused will still have some warm feelings for the abuser and will be able to remember nice things that happened with that parent in the past. A child who is alienated will have blocked out any remembrance of nice things that happened, and will paint one parent as all white and the other parent as all black. That is misleading for anybody who does not understand the dynamics of parental alienation. So hearing the voice of the child is important, but it's important to know who is going to hear the voice of the child and who is going to transmit it with the appropriate balance. I thank you very much for listening. I will be happy to answer questions. This parental alienation, this child psychological abuse is an international plague, and many people around the world are working on it. I am delighted to be one of them. I'm delighted to have been invited to speak to you, and I will be also happy to give my assistance to judges and lawyers, to organizations who would like me to speak and lecture in more detail about these things. One final point. This is a public health issue. We are in the middle of a pandemic, which is called COVID-19, which requires everybody involved to work on it intensively. Parental alienation is also a pandemic. It is a silent pandemic. And public health authorities need to invest money, and the other authority need to invest money in prevention and in early identification and immediate treatment, because this will save money for the health services and for the court services, for police, social work services down the line. And it needs to be dealt with as a public health emergency. The other thing is that judges, lawyers, medical doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers need to be working together so that they can develop a common language and a common understanding of the phenomenon and how to prevent it. These are the details of how to contact me, my website and my email address and my telephone number. Thank you very much indeed. I'll be happy to take questions. Unfortunately, I cannot read Ukrainian, so somebody will have to read the questions for me and translate them into English. So are there any comments or questions that I can help with?
Да, конечно, конечно, и мы работаем. Спасибо. Давайте. Так удобно? Ирина, вы нас слышите?
Да, с какого вопроса будем начинать? Ага, вопрос. Хорошо. Вопрос у нас есть. Есть ли у вас понятный эмоционально завершенный развод? По словам психолога Пуди Найта, такой развод может провоцировать синдром отчужденного родительства.
It is not a legal concept, but the results are what we see in the court. There are couples who may get divorced, but the relationship between them is maintained, and they may be coming back to the court again and again for adjustments or for new orders because they have not finished their business. So, and this is connected to parental alienation, because the applications they make to the court may be because one of them says that the other one is not allowing proper contact, and an experienced judge with a social worker who is helping him will be able to identify what is the source of these repeated applications to the court and recommend appropriate therapy and treatment so as to finish the relationship. The fact is, however, that when a couple have children, they have to remain in contact. This is not a regular civil case where the parties did not know each other before the contract or did not know each other before the accident and will not know each other afterwards. So that the therapy has to be directed towards encouraging continuing contact, a continuing relationship devoted to the needs of the child and not going back to what had happened while the couple were living together. So that is one of the focuses of the psychological support, is dealing with unfinished relationships. There is a need to distinguish between the couple relationship, between man and wife, and the relationship between each of them and the children. And many people have difficulty distinguishing one thing from the other, and they need to be encouraged to do so. Yeah. Any more questions?
Да, следующий вопрос звучит так. Знаю, что есть критерии синдрома отчужденного родителя. Для выяснения заказывают экспертизу или консультацию у специалиста.
Yes, can I hear the question? May I hear the question? Okay, all right. Usually, there are really three stages. One is the stage where you read what the parents have said and you hear them. And an experienced judge will know in many cases how seriously to take the allegations, and by asking a few questions, we'll be able to deal with the issue. The second stage in Israel is the court social worker. the court social worker will interview both parents, may see the child, and will produce a very short written report. And that will give an indication to the judge as to whether this is a proper case for full investigation. And at that point, the judge may decide to give temporary orders, and this is extremely important, orders until he receives a full-scale expert's report. Where an expert has to be appointed, there has to be care in selecting the expert and make sure the expert does in fact know about parental alienation. And in Israel, we have a regulation that the parties are not allowed to bring their own expert's report. They can only ask the court to appoint an expert, and if the court decides there should be an expert, the court will appoint the expert with the knowledge of the parties. And the court will then decide who is going to pay for the expert. It'll usually be both parties. And will give a limited amount of time for the expert to produce his report. And if he's late, the court will immediately threaten him with sanctions. When the expert report is filed, at that point, the judge will allow the parties, if they feel the need, to ask questions of the expert and will hear the evidence in the case. But in my experience, a very tiny percentage of cases need a trial, because in many cases, the court social worker or the expert will bring the parties to an agreement, which then can be approved by the court and given the force of a court judgment or decision. Yeah, next question, please.
Следующий вопрос. Могли бы вы поделиться индикаторами, которые выявляют психологическое отчуждение? Какие критерии и чем это меряется?
Yes, Maria. Not in the context of this. The presumption is that a child will have normal, frequent contact with each parent. If that is not happening, then the court has to ask two very simple questions. Why is the child not seeing both parents properly? And if there is no satisfactory answer to that, or if the answer appears to be strange, at that point, the court will say, this looks to me like parental alienation. The important thing is that each parent should have an opportunity to come to the court and explain what is going on, and explain where there is contact, where there is not contact, and why. And at that point, it is quite simple. There are those who say that it is a complicated thing to diagnose. And clearly, if the parents disagree, then there will be a need for the court to make a decision, and he will need expert evidence. And the criteria are set out in the books, but this is not something that I can deal with in the few minutes I have remaining. If somebody wants to write to me, I can refer them to the literature and they can see it. There is a lot of literature in English. I don't know if there's anything in Ukrainian. It may be useful to have someone to translate a summary of the research and of the professional information into Ukrainian. Okay. Any more questions?
Следующий вопрос. Яким чином суддя оцінює ризики? Можливо, є конкретна схема, що подається зазвичай як докази у випадках таких справ? Чи проводиться судова експертиза? Якщо так, про експертизи була вже відповідь. Отже, про ризики.
So there are really three sources of information. One source is the parents themselves and any witnesses they may want to bring who have relevant information. The second source is the expert opinion of the social worker or the psychologist who is ordered by the judge to give a report. And the third source of information is, of course, the child, who, as I say, may have very important things to say. As far as that is concerned, let me give you an example, which I heard many years ago from a colleague in Australia. Two boys, one aged 14 and one aged 9. The children were living with the mother, and they were supposed to be visiting the father at weekends and once or twice during the week. The oldest son decided that he didn't want to go and see his father. The father immediately said, it must be because the mother is influencing the child. There is parental alienation. The mother said, the child obviously doesn't want to go and see father because the father has been violent. The children were interviewed. And it turns out that the 14-year-old boy was an adolescent, and like many adolescents was going through a difficult period. And the 9-year-old child was a very beautiful, charming child. And the oldest boy said that the father was paying all the attention to the very nice, charming younger brother. And for that reason, he didn't want to go and see the father. So this was not parental alienation. This was not abuse. This was simply a decision based on the child as an adolescent reacting to certain things. And the court, without any trial or hearing, was able to say, so look, the children will be with dad, the older son on Tuesday and the younger son on Friday, and the boys will be together on Sunday, and the matter was resolved because on the day when the children were separated, the father would give all his attention to the older boy on the day he was alone. So not everything that looks like parental alienation is parental alienation, but the children themselves may be able to give useful information. I had a case before me where there were two boys and they didn't want to see the father, and they started saying all kinds of horrible things, that the father hit them with a metal rod. And when I asked the mother if she took them to the doctor, she did not, even though they were injured, and that the father wrapped them in a smelly blanket. Now, these are the kind of allegations which are hard to believe. And in fact, the issue in that case was that the mother had been influencing the children not to have contact with the father because she thought that the father was not giving her enough money in child support. So what the children say can be very useful, but it has to be properly assessed. Yeah.
Итак, это будет последний вопрос. Мы немножко ограничены во времени. Я думаю, что все остальные вопросы вы сможете задать их на Facebook-страничке на нашей. Ссылка есть в чате. Мы сейчас продублируем еще раз. И мы постараемся как-то связаться с Филиппом и эти вопросы выяснить и дать вам ответы. Итак, последний вопрос. Яку стратегію поведінки чи спілкування краще обрати відчуженому батькові при спілкуванні з алієнатором?
There are two issues here. One is that it very much depends on the relationship. Certainly, the parent should try to keep in contact with the child by every method possible. If he can't speak on the phone, he should write letters, can send presents, and it is often an indication of alienation if the letters and presents are not getting through to the child. As far as communication with the other parent, the alienating parent, is concerned, it should be done with professional help. In other words, there should be a psychologist or a social worker appointed so that meetings can take place in a properly designed framework, and so as to avoid a situation that any contact deteriorates and simply becomes exchanging, shouting, and accusations. But that is very much dependent on the specific relationship between the parents. And the other thing that has to be kept in mind at all stages is the welfare of the child, because these proceedings are not about the parents. They're about the child and what the child needs. And the assumption is that if there is no outrageous violence or abuse or neglect, then the child needs both parents. Again, I thank you for inviting me, and I thank you for listening, and I hope to be able to continue to be in contact with you and help. Thank you for Seven for inviting me, and I wish you a pleasant winter, and I hope we will be able to meet in person next time when this horrible virus finishes.
Я хочу висловити, з вашого дозволу, шановні учасники нашого вебінару, велику подяку пану Філіпу, що він погодився на наше запрошення. Я вважаю, що це була, сподіваюся, що це була корисна інформація, і ми дійсно докладемо максимум зусиль для того, щоб залучити пана Філіпа як фахівця і до консультацій, можливо, і, можливо, ми будемо співпрацювати з законодавчою владою в напрямку зміни законодавства та встановлення певних норм, які будуть обов'язковими для виконання, і таким чином ми зможемо розв'язувати ці дуже болючі питання. Ще раз дуже дякую усім. До нових зустрічей.
Thank you very much. We should all be well.
До свидания. До свидания. Спасибо.